welcome to the latest episode of What's Your Wheelhouse? I'm your host, Megan Bauer, Head of Customer Success at Spinwheel. In this series, we interview a handful of subject matter experts on both their personal and professional expertise. And today, I'm happy to be joined by Dan Murphy. Dan, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Megan, and really appreciate Spinwheel for putting this together. My name's Dan Murphy. I'm the founder of Sunset Park Advisory, which is a boutique consulting firm focused on helping fintechs with all things policy, also although more as well. And previously, I was at the CFPB, where I was an official working on the open banking rule and other financial data regulatory issues. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We are happy to have you here today, Dan. So, like I said, we're talking about both your personal and professional expertise, but we'll dive in. Can you tell us a little bit about your wheelhouse is fintech policy? So, what should people understand about that right now that they probably do not?
Sure. Well, I mean, look, fintech policy is really just a subset of broader financial services and technology policy sort of put together, right? And so there's different things that apply depending on what a company might be up to. My particular wheelhouse somehow became financial data policy and regulation. This actually started just on a fluke. I wrote a thesis back in grad school on some things that were happening in Europe. They had some really innovative regulatory ideas over there about allowing consumers to port their data, to move it from one provider to another, while at the same time doing a lot around consumer data privacy. I think everyone remembers GDPR and all the conversation that happened there. And then from there, it just kept being relevant, right? And there kept being more and more to work on and more interesting problems and more interesting companies coming up. And so this has kind of become my little bailiwick somehow. But in particular, open banking has really become the thing that I've spent the most time on the last couple of years. And in particular, the 1033 rule at the CFPB. But I've also spent a pretty good amount of time on issues related to credit reporting and privacy more generally, too.
Awesome. I'm glad you kind of gave us a sneak peek as to how you ended up in this space because I feel like
Yeah.
it's a unique path to go down.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really weird when a school paper turns into something actually useful. I think this is like my one and only example. So,
Perfect. Applies to real life. So uh, you are the expert in this stuff, but you talked about like the 1033 rule, right? So maybe for the audience, explain a little bit about what that is, but also what is your take on what's coming next with it? Because there's been a lot going on related to the 1033 rule.
sure. So 1033 has been a long saga, and I wouldn't blame folks if they haven't been following it closely. But you have to rewind the clock actually all the way back to 2010, post-financial crisis. We're in this moment when the mortgage market has melted down. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done in Washington around bank regulation generally. And Congress passes Dodd-Frank. And Dodd-Frank remakes the entire financial regulatory apparatus to respond to the financial crisis in a number of different ways, right? One of the ways that Congress responded to the financial crisis was around the creation of the CFPB, which at the time was a new entity that was specializing in consumer finance and really taking most of the pieces of the other regulators that had been kind of off the side of their desk focused on consumer finance and putting it all under one roof. It gave the CFPB a whole bunch of things to do, right? And so again, you can imagine this is 2010, mortgages are in the news. That was a lot of the work the CFPB had to do, but it really wasn't all of it. And so Section 1033 was one of sort of the last lagging items on the CFPB's to-do list. And what it says is that subject to rules prescribed by the Bureau, so it's a directive for the Bureau to prescribe rules, consumers have the ability to share their information or to access their information held at a financial institution. And so, and the statute, very importantly, applies to consumers and their agents or representatives. So this has always been interpreted to mean that consumers, of course, in the normal course, can get their information, say, from an online banking portal or in a PDF form or something like that. But then, I mean, look, it's the 21st century. We have a lot of other much more modern tools than that available today. And so you can also share your information with another company that wants to do something for you, whether that's underwriting a loan or maybe making a PFM tool available so that you can see all of your accounts in one place, or even making a Venmo payment, right? It really all depends on a third party's ability to access consumer data with their permission. So the CFPB, while I was there, to fast forward quite a bit, we finalized a rule of Section 1033, essentially laying out rules for how banks and other data providers need to make that data available, and how fintechs and other authorized third parties, which is a term of art that we came up with, need to treat consumer data when they get it. Because, look, at the end of the day, this is consumer financial data. It's all pretty sensitive. You should have to be careful. And I think everyone wants to be a responsible actor here. So that's what we did. Megan, I'm happy to pause there. But also, as you alluded to, there's been quite a bit of back and forth over this over the last, I guess, year and a half now. So happy to jump into that too, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of your take on what's going to happen next, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, it's been a long road. This rule was years and years and years in the making. And then unfortunately, there was a lawsuit as soon as the rule came out, which was pretty unexpected. And when it came out, I think the lawsuit challenged the rule on really fundamental grounds, essentially arguing that the CFPB never had the authority to promulgate any rule like this to begin with. I don't want to get into the whole dramatic saga, but I think
For
it's
the second episode.
that's for a second episode.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say at that point that I do not anticipate that argument to win the day. It's not an argument that really anyone has taken seriously for years and years and years. And I think at the end of the day, that argument will fail. So I think what's happening now is the CFPB has reopened the rule, and there's a new administration, new leadership at the CFPB, new folks involved, and this isn't atypical, right? Where a new administration might want to reopen an old decision and decide, hey, do we want to sort of take this in a different direction? So that's really what's happening now is they're reopening a lot of the issues and seeing if there's things they want to change. There's been some particular fights over whether or not banks should be allowed to charge fees for data access, what third parties should be able to use consumer data for. There's been questions about liability. There's really been a long running list of issues to work through here. And we'll see. We'll see where they land, right? I mean, I don't have any inside information. I don't know where they're going to land on these things. But I guess I would just say, as someone who spends a lot of time on this, it's really hard. These issues are really hard once you dig in on them. And so I think once you actually dig in and see your option set, it's probably not as large as some folks imagine it to be. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that we land somewhere reasonably close to where we started all this.
All right, I appreciate your cliff notes on that, but to tap into this even a little bit more. So, for some of the financial institutions and the data providers who've been waiting around to see where things land, what advice do you give to them today as we wait on this new NPRM on the rule?
Stop. Stop waiting would be my absolute advice. I mean, look, I think in the time leading up to the final rule, the one before everything happened, it was clear to me that a lot of, let's say, mid-sized to, large, super regional financial institutions and others smaller than them we're really starting to put together thoughtful plans around not just how to come into compliance, but also if this is going to happen, if this is the future, if consumers have this ability to share their data, how do we turn that into a competitive opportunity for us, not just a cost center, right? Which I think is the right way to think about that. And there's really smart folks at a lot of the large banks and mid-sized banks and other banks that have thought a lot about that. I think unfortunately when the lawsuit happened, what seems to have happened, at least from the outside, is that a lot of those plans may have been put on hold because I think there may have been sort of another preference, which is if we don't have to do any of this, then we're fine not to. Um, and I think some of those plans may be pending the result of the lawsuit and of the new reopened rule now. I think if you want to get ahead of this, you have to go to where the puck is going, and I feel pretty confident that the puck is not going to no open banking. The puck is not going to consumers are not allowed to move their information. Uh, in a world of AI, the puck is not going to more information silos, it's going to fewer. So I think for banks to get ahead of this, they really have to probably stop thinking defensively on some of this. And I understand that's easy to say from the outside. But they do need to start thinking offensively and think about, okay, in a world where there's just more competition, more products available, there's less informational barriers. How do we provide value to our customers? And I'll give you my preferred name for the 1033 rule. How do we earn our customers? And I always thought that was the right way to think about this, is that institutions, whether they're banks, fintechs, anybody in between, you have to earn your customer in a free market.
Yeah, I appreciate your conviction and your advice there. And like you said, if you kind of sit back and wait and don't follow where things are going or where you anticipate they'll be, you'll get passed by others as well. So,
Yeah, yeah,
pro tips for everyone listening.
absolutely.
Yeah, so you touched upon this a little bit too, but the other hot debate in fintech policy right now is AI, and it's of course super relevant to the financial data topic and all the information that's flowing out there. So, what should people know in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's maybe to break it in two. I think with respect to AI, there's a lot to talk about, right? I mean, we could have an entire hours long podcast on that. Two ways maybe I'm thinking about it, maybe specific to this space, are what are the B2C use cases and what are the B2B implications? And so to get into like why I'm framing it that way. With respect to direct to consumer use cases of AI, this is really just an extension of a lot of the data privacy debates that have been had for years and years and years around what an entity can be able or is allowed to use a consumer's data for once they have it or once the consumer's given it to them, whatever the flow might be there, right? And so we've seen different versions of this debate play out abroad. I mentioned GDPR before, but there's a lot of other international regulations as well. We've seen it play out domestically, much more so at the state level. We have CCPA and CPRA and a number of other state privacy laws. At the federal level, we still have older privacy laws primarily, but more new national data privacy laws have really gotten stuck in Congress on issues like preemption and private rights of action. It's really all kind of gotten stuck at the federal level. But what that means is that de facto, the states, and especially the large states, the Californias and New Yorks of the world, are really the ones that are setting the standard for how data is used. Now, that all might just feel like, oh, right, that's this old data privacy debate that we've been hearing about that never seems to go anywhere. But it just maps 100% cleanly onto AI as well, right? Because to the extent that B2C use cases for AI, so, you're using Claude to give you advice on, your taxes or whatever it might be, that's just another use case of your consumer data. And so how Claude treats that data, what it's allowed to do, not allowed to do with that data, that all sort of flows from this same data privacy debate. So I guess that's how I'm thinking about it on the B2C side. On the B2B side, it seems like we're even more off to the races though, right? Because there's not quite this overhanging consumer data privacy and other compliance and regulatory concerns in a lot of those cases. And so it's just how can you help businesses be more efficient? And maybe to give an example with respect to open banking, just because it's something I spend time on, I don't think a week goes by at this point where I don't have somebody call me or I don't bump into somebody who's thinking about how do you use AI to build more efficient data aggregation, which has always been the really big bottleneck for fintechs, right? Is it possible today to build more efficient aggregation tools using AI than it was in the past when this was built for what I call the digital fintech era, which is kind of the era we've all been living in up to today. So I think there's efficiency and there's this new use cases. I won't pretend to know where the puck is going, but I guess to maybe put a bow on it, it felt to me through the 2010s like a lot of the value add of fintechs was, look, just let me DIY my finances. Just let me do it myself. I don't need a bank to help me with it. I don't need an advisor to help me with it. I want to DIY it. Now it feels like the zeitgeist is much more, let me delegate more of this to an agent to do it for me and do it even more efficiently. And it feels like that's where the puck is going from where I sit.
Do you think that certain companies or folks are doing a little bit of do now and ask for forgiveness later? Like, are they moving quickly
Yeah,
with what's available with them in AI and like letting the policy piece catch up to them, if you will?
absolutely. And I mean, especially in this environment with the federal government having taken a pretty different tack on financial regulation, I think it's fair to say, or and tech regulation and antitrust and, insert any government role here, right? So I think there's certainly a little bit of a ask for forgiveness, not permission sense right now. Although I think that is something that folks are going to have to start thinking more and more carefully about. Because while there's been this shock and awe, maybe, of the first year or so of this administration, and it's taken a while for, the states to catch up, the states have staffed up quite a bit now. And so you've got state regulators, state legislators, governor's offices that are very focused now on some of these issues and on backfilling what the federal government typically does. And as we've seen with data privacy, it doesn't really matter necessarily in some cases if Congress just gets fully stuck on an issue. Because if you have a state like California or New York or Texas or another large state decide to go in a particular direction, it can really have consequences across the market. And so I think the honeymoon is probably already over with respect to maybe to mix metaphors here, mom and dad being away. I think the babysitter has probably arrived.
Eventually, you have to answer to someone. So,
Yes, exactly, exactly.
okay, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for the financial providers when it comes to AI and privacy and the financial data, and what should the financial providers be thinking about now?
Well, I guess for banks, they have a hard question to wrestle with, and banks have a hard job. I mean, I work a lot with fintechs, but I think it's worth saying that banks just have a really hard and really important role, not just in the financial sector, but in the economy writ
Shout
large.
out to the banks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think banks are going to have a hard task, both integrating AI and continuing to be competitive from a tech perspective, but then also just from a product fundamentals perspective, right? So going back to what I was saying before about the zeitgeist, maybe, and maybe it's early to call this, but maybe shifting towards consumers wanting to delegate an agent to go do something for them. One of the somethings that consumers might want an agent to do for them is shopping around. And so we've heard a lot about this in this agentic commerce debate where it's like, okay, can you like go shop for me on Amazon or shop for me wherever to buy this thing that I need, find me a good deal. The same, I think, eventually holds true for financial services. And so you're going to have consumers delegating to agents to shop for the best rate on a loan for them, to shop for the best interest rate for their savings and a savings account. And an AI agent doesn't get tired. It doesn't really have any sort of behavioral quirks necessarily, or at least not the same behavioral quirks that you can play on with a person. So you really kind of can't rest on your laurels depending on consumer inertia to prevent them from switching, say, from one savings account to another to get a better rate. Because an AI agent might just look at it and say, you can get a couple more basis points over here, move the money and move it now. And if they have right access capabilities, they may be able to actually just do that in an automated fashion. Um, there's a lot of questions to answer around that, right? I mean, there's questions around consumer protection, there's questions around data security, there's questions around privacy, but there's also prudential regulatory concerns, right? Which just means, safety and soundness. If you have deposits sloshing around from one bank to another, how should banks think about that on their balance sheets? And so I think there is a lot to think about as all of this develops.
Okay, I got two questions for you on that one. First one is, what's your prediction in terms of, I guess, how soon will we see agents potentially acting on behalf of these consumers, working directly with the banks and the fintechs?
Oh man. I guess you could arguably say we've already seen it, right? I think there's already companies out there that are piloting some of this, but I think in a limited fashion for the time being. How soon do we see this really take off en masse? I think it takes some time, right? I mean, there's a huge degree of consumer trust that's going to be required for this to become what I just described. I think would I be comfortable just delegating my money today to an AI bot to just, do no, I wouldn't yet, right? I think we still have some more work to do on that front. But I think that really underscores the importance of the policy and regulatory conversation, right? Because if building trust is the barrier, then you really need to figure out what are the guardrails and go to wherever those guardrails are being created. So timeline, I don't know. Probably longer than industry like, but probably longer than industry would like, but sooner than regulators would like.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, so my second piece of that is from your perspective on this, like what keeps you up at night as you think about all of these? I mean, the AI pieces related to the data privacy and policy and all that.
Yeah, I mean, what keeps me up, I think, is probably a similar thing to what keeps everybody up, but maybe a particular version of it, which is just consumer alignment, right? Or not even consumer, maybe even just principal alignment, right? Where typically in agency law, if you've got a principal and an agent, and the agent acts on behalf of the principal, and you can think about this in the context of your accountant, or if you've ever worked as a lawyer for something, or like this is a kind of a known framework in not just in the US, but everywhere. Um, I think getting that right in the context of agent-like functions at scale is hard and is going to have to be built on the back of some really old legal traditions, probably, but also matched to some really new functionalities, right? And there's going to have to be a sliding scale of how serious of an action is being taken on my behalf. How much autonomy does an agent really have? How much discretion do they have? There's going to have to be a scale there. It's probably not a binary, you're not allowed to do any of this, or you're allowed to just do everything, no questions asked. There's going to have to be some really thoughtful policy work that goes into that. And that's going to take time, I think. And that keeps me up because at my core, I got into consumer protection for a reason. I think ensuring that consumers are well served, and anybody who works with AI is well served is something that industry should want, but short-term and long-term incentives and getting those to align is always a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, what's the next phase of checks and balances, right? Like who's gonna keep the agents aligned, like you said. So we'll
Yep.
have to wait and see a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So I've peppered you a lot on this policy, data policy, fintech policy, all that good stuff, and appreciate all of your insight there. But let's shift over to my favorite question of the series. What is your non-professional or your personal wheelhouse right now?
Sure. So I worry this might sound cooler than it is, but I think it is fun. During the pandemic, I started doing open fire cooking in my backyard just because it was the pandemic and we were all, making some people were making sourdough. Was the thing that I started to do.
I
So
did not see that trending as much during the pandemic, so maybe you were a
I
pioneer.
Yeah, I blame Chef's Table. I think there was some Chef's Table episode or something that I watched that got me on this path. But yeah, no. So I bought a particular type of grill, which is almost just think of like a raised fire pit, almost, right? Where you can really start with whole, like pieces of wood, just like a campfire, like whole logs, and burn them down and cook over an open fire. And this was something that I started doing during the pandemic. And I've kind of kept doing a bit. And so, I'm not doing if you go watch Chef's Table or some of these documentaries, you can watch guys like Francis Mallman or Lennox Hasty, some really cool chefs doing, whole lambs or in some cases even whole cows, which blows my mind. I'm not doing anything that crazy, but I've done some whole chickens and I've done some other pretty cool meals just over an open flame. And it's actually really fun. And it makes amazing food if you know what to do and you have the right tools. And it's always a crowd pleaser, right? I mean, if anybody's ever been camping, just hanging out around a fire is generally pretty fun. And so, yeah, even here in Brooklyn, I've managed to keep this going in my small little backyard area, which has been great.
I was gonna say, I wasn't sure if you were gonna divulge for the audience where you're doing some of this open fire cooking, but it's not in like a lavish backyard necessarily out in, rural farmland. This is real backyard city open flame cooking.
This is, and I haven't checked local ordinances, so I may be outing myself here in a way that maybe so. But I think I'm good, and truthfully too. I mean, in this setting, I do use a little bit more charcoal than I used to too, and also just time constraints. I don't have as much time now as I did during the pandemic. But yeah, that's my hobby I picked up the last couple of years, which has been a lot of fun.
I love that. What's the best thing you've made, or maybe like the most entertaining thing you've made?
I think some of the whole chickens are kind of fun, entertaining wise, just because there's different ways you can do it. You can spatchcock it and like just kind of direct. You can get that right, but you have to be careful because you can pretty easily overcook it or undercook it. Um, but you can also hang it and smoke it over the course of a long period of time and then grill at the end, which is fun. And so I've done that. I've also done tacos al pastor over a spit, which is a lot of fun and come out really well. Some of the best stuff, though, I find tends to just be some of the simplest. So, like maybe my favorite thing to make, just because everyone always loves it, is chicken shawarma. And so,
Mm.
just getting boneless, skinless chicken breasts. If I have time, also getting some lamb and doing lamb shawarma, and just doing it pretty simply over the fire. It just comes out so good. So that's always a crowd pleaser.
I love that. Is it always meat, or do you ever do anything else?
No, no, vegetables as well. I mean, any vegetables over the fire are great, right? So, I mean, it's easy, of course, to do, whether it's Brussels sprouts or asparagus, or, there's a lot that you can do there. I actually have a special Lodge cast iron vegetable tray that I use just to cook vegetables over it because they tend to just come out better. This isn't my original thought, but I've read some of these chefs work on it and watched some of what they do for inspiration, and they all kind of say the same thing, which is right, which is if you just cook vegetables a little bit better, you might get your kids to eat them more regularly. So I can definitely say that, for example, Brussels sprouts cooked over an open fire are much better than steamed. And so or baked. There's definitely advantages.
Yeah, that's an excellent tip for parents, but it's probably relevant for adults as well too. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
have you had to step up any of your equipment game by doing this?
A little
Or do you
bit.
keep it very rustic where it's like, hey, you could hollow out a log, not that you would do that, but
Yeah.
you see the open fire in the wild kind of. So what are you working
Yeah.
with?
Yeah, I literally started with just like a cheap fire pit from the Home Depot, and that lasted not that long because there's just a lot of downsides to having to just hunch over this thing and use a pretty cheap grate to do it. So I actually upgraded to a Kudu grill, Kudu, which is it's kind of like a raised fire pit, but it has these grates that you can swivel over top of the fire. It also comes with some other equipment you can use, like a smoker lid and some other things. It's not ideal if you're trying to do, like, if you're purely into smoking meats, like this isn't that, right? This is a little bit different than your typical barbecue equipment, but it's really good. And so the Kudu is pretty good for me. But if you've ever seen the Argentinian parrillas, that would be the ideal setup if you had this grill on a wheel that you can raise up and down, and that would be the ideal setup, but I don't have that yet.
Okay, that's the move. Well, maybe once you are, I don't know if you're going to be in the city forever, but if you move out of it, then you can have a little more space to do some of that. So,
Yeah.
I love it. Well, now you've left me with my stomach growling and my mouth watering since I'm about 2 hours behind on lunch here. But this was awesome, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on financial policy, but also some backyard grilling. We love it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Megan. Appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode soon.